What if the graphics card industry just told you, flat out, that your money isn't worth a real product anymore? That's not a dramatic exaggeration. That's exactly what happened when AMD dropped the RX 9050 into the world with a variant carrying just 4 GB of VRAM in the year 2026. 4 GB. Let that number sit with you for a second, because I promise you, by the end of this, you're going to understand why that number should make you angry, confused, or maybe even a little bit fascinated by how far a company is willing to push a budget product before consumers finally push back.
I want you to picture the moment I first heard this spec sheet. AMD has spent years building a reputation as the generous one, the brand that throws VRAM at you like it's candy. The 9060 comes with 16 gigs. The 9070 comes with 16 gigs. Every single card in that modern lineup has been drowning in memory, almost as a marketing flex against the competition. And then, out of nowhere, this, a 4 GB card in 2026. It's the kind of decision that makes you sit back and ask, wait, did they forget what year it is?
Here's where it gets worse. This isn't just about the number 4, it's about what's attached to that number. The 4 GB variant of the RX 9050 runs on a 64-bit memory bus, not 128-bit, which is already considered painfully thin by today's standards. 64-bit. For context, cards like the RTX 5060 already get criticized for their 128-bit bus being too narrow for the segment. This card cuts that in half, so you're not just getting less memory, you're getting memory that moves data at a crawl. It's a double punishment: less room to store what the game needs, and a slower highway to move it back and forth. That combination is exactly the recipe that turned a card years ago, the RX 6500 XT, into one of the most notorious failures in recent graphics card history.
You remember the 6500 XT, right? If you don't, buckle up, because this story is basically repeating itself in real time. That card launched with a narrow bus and limited memory, got torn apart by reviewers and gamers alike, and became a cautionary tale that AMD themselves seemed to have learned from until now. It's almost poetic in the worst way. The same company that built its reputation partly by avoiding those exact mistakes is now walking directly back into them with a brand new product in a brand new generation.
So let's actually talk about what 4 GB gets you in practical terms, because this is where the debate splits people into two very different camps. Camp 1 says 4 gigs is fine, actually. Their argument is this: if you're only playing esports titles, games optimized to run on a potato, lightweight competitive shooters, casual browser tier experiences, then sure, 4 gigs might technically be enough. Add in upscaling technology like FSR, and you can stretch that thin memory pool just a little further by rendering at a lower internal resolution and reconstructing the image. On paper, that sounds like a reasonable safety net.
But here's the problem, and this is where Camp 2 comes in, loud and furious. The moment you step outside of that extremely narrow lane, the moment you try to play any modern AAA title, even at low settings, 4 GB starts collapsing under its own weight. Think about a game like Black Myth Wukong. Testing on cards with 6 to 8 GB of VRAM, even at medium settings on a simple 1080p, 100Hz display, memory usage climbed past 6 GB. Past 6, not close to 4, past 6. So a card locked at 4 gigs isn't just uncomfortable in that scenario. It's fundamentally incapable of running the experience the way it was designed to be played.
And I want you to really sit with the math here, because the numbers tell a brutal story. When a card with 8 GB of VRAM needs 9 GB for a game, that's roughly a 12% shortfall. Annoying, sure, but survivable. The frame rate might dip occasionally, stutter here and there, but it's not catastrophic. Now flip that same ratio onto a 4 GB card. If a game needs 5 GB and you only have 4, that's a 25% shortfall. 25%. That's not an occasional stutter. That's a fundamentally broken experience. That's constant texture pop-in, frame drops that hit like clockwork, and a game that technically boots and technically runs, but never actually feels smooth. You might hit 60 frames per second on paper, but it will never, ever feel like 60 frames per second the way it does on a card that isn't starving for memory.
Now here's the part that made this whole situation feel almost cruel. AMD built FSR4 into this card. Full native support, not the stripped-down version that older cards got stuck running. On paper, that should be a redemption arc. Better upscaling technology, closer to the quality of the competition's premium reconstruction tech, finally trickling down to an entry-level product. Except there's a catch nobody wants to admit. Upscaling technology still requires memory overhead to function. You're asking a starving card to also run an additional AI process on top of everything else it's struggling with. It's like handing someone who's already out of breath an extra weight to carry while telling them it'll make them look better while they collapse. The visual quality improves. The stuttering does not go away. You get a prettier version of the same problem, not a solution to it.
And this is where I have to bring up the elephant in the room, pricing. Because at the end of the day, every single technical flaw in the world can be forgiven if the price is aggressive enough. That's just how consumer electronics work. Nobody expects perfection at the bottom of the market, they expect fair value. So let's actually run these numbers. The 8GB version of the RX 9050 carries a suggested price of roughly $280. The 4GB version comes in around $199. On the surface, that sounds like a reasonable discount for half the memory. But when you actually translate that into real-world retail pricing, once local taxes and import costs get added, that 4GB card ends up landing in almost the exact same price bracket as existing entry-level cards that are already considered mediocre, cards that have been publicly ridiculed for their limitations for over a year now.
Think about what that actually means. You're paying nearly the same money for a brand new 4GB, 64-bit card that you'd pay for a used, previous generation card with more memory and a wider bus. When two products land in the same price range and one of them is objectively more limited on paper, guess which one most buyers are going to gravitate toward? It's not going to be the new exotic, feature-rich underdog. It's going to be the safe, known quantity, even if that known quantity has its own well-documented flaws. Brand trust and predictability tend to beat spec sheet promises every single time in the budget segment, and that's a pattern that's held up again and again in this price bracket.
Here's the theory I want to plant in your head, because I think this is bigger than just one graphics card. I think AMD is testing the waters. I think this 4GB variant exists specifically to probe how low they can push memory capacity before the market revolts. And if this card sells reasonably well through OEM channels, pre-built systems from major manufacturers that never actually go through public retail scrutiny, then what stops this from becoming a trend? What stops us from seeing 3GB cards or worse in the near future? Because remember, this exact same pattern played out with the RX 6500 XT. It launched at an uncomfortable price, got dragged through the mud by reviewers and gamers, and only found its audience once the price dropped low enough to make sense in a genuinely budget build. History doesn't just rhyme in tech, it practically repeats word for word.
And that brings up the most controversial angle of this entire story. Is this card even meant for you at all? Because there's a very real possibility that this 4GB variant was never designed with individual retail buyers in mind in the first place. Multiple reports suggest the 4GB version might be locked exclusively to pre-built OEM systems, meaning it would never actually appear on store shelves for you to buy separately. If that's true, then this entire online firestorm, the outrage, the comparisons to failed products, the endless debate, might be aimed at a product that was never meant to compete in the open market to begin with. That raises an uncomfortable question. Is the backlash even fair? Or are we all collectively losing our minds over a card that quietly exists in the background of office computers and pre-built systems, doing exactly the low-stakes job it was built for, while nobody who actually buys graphics cards individually will ever even encounter it?
But let's say, for the sake of argument, that this card does end up on shelves somewhere, in some market at some price point. Who is it actually for? Because here's a wild alternative nobody's talking about enough. Integrated graphics. AMD already builds genuinely impressive integrated GPUs into some of their processors, chips capable of running esports titles and light gaming without needing a discrete card at all. If your needs are truly that minimal, truly that basic, why would you spend money on a new discrete card with a memory bottleneck this severe when an integrated solution might already cover your use case for free? The problem is availability. Not every processor comes bundled with that stronger integrated graphics chip. And the ones that do tend to show up in premium mini PCs or specialty systems that cost significantly more than a standard build. So suddenly this 4GB card exists in this strange middle ground, arguably worse than a used previous generation card, potentially redundant against integrated graphics for the exact audience it's targeting, and only justified if the pricing lands in an almost impossibly aggressive sweet spot.
And here's my honest, personal take, the one that I think is going to ruffle some feathers. If I'm building the cheapest possible functional gaming PC right now, today, in this market, I would choose a previous generation card with more memory over this new 4GB option every single time. Not because the new card doesn't have better underlying technology, because it absolutely does. Better upscaling, better architecture, better efficiency on paper. But stability matters more than spec sheet bragging rights when you're working with an extremely tight budget. A 6GB card that just works, that doesn't choke the instant you load a demanding title, is worth more to a real person building a real PC than a shinier 4GB card that forces you to compromise on every single setting just to keep the experience playable.
So where does that leave us? It leaves us in a genuinely fascinating, genuinely uncomfortable place in the graphics card market. A place where a major manufacturer is willing to ship a product with specifications that would have been considered laughably outdated 5 years ago, dressed up with modern software features that can polish the experience but can never fix the fundamental hardware limitation underneath it. A place where pricing, not raw performance, ends up being the single deciding factor in whether a product succeeds or becomes a punchline. And a place where the real battle isn't even about whether 4GB is enough. It's about whether companies can keep testing how little they can give consumers before consumers finally say no.
Let's dig even deeper into why this matters beyond just one product line, because I think there's a psychological angle here that most people are missing entirely. When a company releases a product like this, they're not just selling hardware, they're testing perception. They're testing whether the brand halo built up over years of goodwill, years of being seen as the generous alternative with more memory and better value, is strong enough to survive a genuinely questionable release. And that's a dangerous game to play, because trust in this industry is incredibly hard to rebuild once it cracks. Ask anyone who remembers exactly how much goodwill got burned the moment the 6500 XT launched at an uncomfortable price with a narrow bus and limited memory. It took actual price cuts, real concessions, before that card found any kind of audience. The lesson should have been learned. And yet, here we are again.
I also want to address something that came up constantly in the discussion around this release. The idea that criticism of a budget card is somehow unfair because not everyone needs a powerhouse graphics card. And look, I get the argument. Not everybody is trying to run the latest AAA blockbuster at ultra settings with ray tracing cranked to maximum. Some people genuinely just want something that outputs a picture, runs a browser, handles a spreadsheet, and maybe lets them squeeze in a round of a lightweight competitive shooter after work. That's a completely valid use case. But here's my counterpoint, and it's one that I think holds up under scrutiny. If your needs are genuinely that minimal, you probably don't need a discrete graphics card in the first place. Modern integrated graphics, especially on higher-end mobile and desktop processors, already handle that exact workload without requiring you to spend extra money on a separate card that's going to bottleneck on memory the second you ask it to do anything more demanding. So the 4GB card ends up occupying this strange, almost pointless middle ground. Too weak for real gaming, arguably redundant for the ultra-basic use case it claims to target.
There's another layer to this that I think deserves way more attention than it's getting, and that's the used market angle. Right now, if you're building a budget system and you're willing to consider a previous generation card, you have access to genuinely capable hardware at prices that make a brand new 4GB card look almost insulting by comparison. Cards with 6GB of memory, wider memory buses, proven track records in real-world gaming scenarios, available secondhand for prices that undercut or match the new budget option. When that's the alternative sitting right next to a brand new, narrower, more limited product, the value proposition for the new card basically evaporates, unless the pricing is aggressive enough to completely override that comparison. And based on everything we've seen so far, that kind of aggressive pricing hasn't materialized, not even close.
Now let's talk about the timing of all this, because I don't think it's a coincidence. This release is landing during a period where component prices across the board are climbing. Memory prices, storage prices, all trending upward in a way that's squeezing budget builders from every direction. In an environment like that, releasing a product that cuts corners on the exact component that's already becoming more expensive and more precious feels almost tone-deaf. It's one thing to release a memory-constrained budget card when memory prices are stable and reasonable. It's another thing entirely to do it right as the cost of memory itself is spiking, making every gigabyte you're missing out on feel even more painful by comparison. The optics could not be worse, honestly. And I think that's part of why the reaction to this card has been as sharp and immediate as it has.
Here's something else worth considering, a theory that I think holds a lot of weight once you actually sit with it. What if this card isn't really about gamers at all? What if the actual target audience is corporate refresh cycles, office deployments, government contracts, environments where hundreds or thousands of machines need some form of basic graphics output and video decode capability? But nobody involved in that purchasing decision has any intention of running a demanding game on it. In that context, 4GB of memory on a narrow bus is not a limitation. It's actually more than sufficient. Nobody in an accounting department is trying to run a graphically intensive title during their lunch break. If that's genuinely where this product is aimed, then the entire consumer backlash, every ounce of outrage from gamers and enthusiasts, might be aimed at the wrong target completely. The card was never trying to win over people like us in the first place. It was trying to win a bulk purchasing contract from someone who cares about total cost across 1,000 units, not gaming performance on any single one of them.
But even if that's true, and I think there's a reasonable chance it is, it doesn't fully let this release off the hook. Because the marketing around it, the way it gets presented and discussed publicly, still frames it within the context of gaming graphics cards, still gets compared directly against gaming-focused competitors, still ends up in the same conversation as cards built specifically for gaming performance. If you're going to build a product for a corporate deployment use case, position it that way from the start. Don't let it sit in the same category as gaming hardware and then act surprised when gamers evaluate it as gaming hardware and find it lacking. That kind of ambiguous positioning creates exactly the kind of confusion and backlash we're seeing play out right now.
Let's also talk honestly about what this means for the broader graphics card market going forward. Because I don't think this is an isolated incident. I think this is a signal. Once one major manufacturer proves that a heavily memory-constrained product can still ship, still get placed into pre-built systems, still generate revenue even amid public criticism, that becomes a precedent other manufacturers can point to internally when justifying their own cost-cutting decisions down the line. This is exactly how race-to-the-bottom trends start in any hardware industry. Not with a dramatic, obvious moment, but with a quiet, defensible first step that gets normalized just enough to make the next step easier to justify. If this 4GB card performs well enough in whatever niche it's actually targeting, don't be shocked if we start seeing even more aggressive memory cuts on future budget hardware, dressed up with just enough software polish to make the compromise feel acceptable to whoever isn't paying close enough attention.
So here's the question I want you sitting with as this ends. If a 4GB graphics card can exist, get marketed, and potentially sell in 2026, dressed up with modern upscaling technology and a brand name people trust, what does that actually say about where the entry-level market is heading? Are we looking at a one-off experiment that quietly fades away once the backlash proves too loud to ignore? Or are we looking at the opening move in a much longer game? One where memory capacity keeps shrinking while marketing keeps getting louder, until the definition of what counts as a functional graphics card gets rewritten entirely without most buyers even noticing it happened.
If you enjoy this video, please like, share, subscribe and hit the bell to the later update from my channel. Thank you for watching till the end and see you in the next video.